that it was impossible to establish socialism just in Russia. So he had to come up with some excuse in Marxist language, and he said, what's happening in Russia is the first step of the world socialist revolution. So they, at least he said that he expected this to happen or not. It's, okay, we'll do it first, then they'll do it in Germany, and then they'll do it in France and Italy, and then we'll be safe because we'll have a majority of workers. But he was deluding himself. I mean, there was discontent, and various things did happen. You call revolutions, if you like. I mean, it wasn't just the Tsar that got overthrown. The Kaiser was the next one, and then the Emperor of Austria. They all got overthrown in the end. But I mean, it stopped there. So there was discontent, and people wanted to have democratic institutions. But all the elections that were held in Germany, and France, and Britain, and Italy, they returned. In France and England and Britain, they returned patriotic people, and in Germany they returned ordinary social democrats who just wanted a democratic republic. So Lenin, if that was his reason why he did it, he became unstuck. But last weekend I was at a book fair in Oxford, and they were selling a book, what's called Lenin's Last Struggle, and I'm convinced on reading it that Lenin, when he was down in 1922 and 1923, realised he made a mistake. He said, what the fuck have I done? What have I done? We've seized power here, and what can we do with it? Because the country's so backward, and speculate what might have happened if he hadn't been shot by this social revolution in 1918. But I don't know. The victory that the Socialist Standard gave to Lenin was quite a fulsome one. But he did behave like Robespierre and those other people, ruthlessly shooting at women.
So, when was that again? I'm sorry.
On that point, it's a bit further along from the revolution, but the death of Lenin. I don't know the history there of exactly how Stalin would come to power then. I mean, but was that a deliberate choice of Lenin? Was he in a position to declare Stalin the leader of Russia?
Well, there was a famous testament that Lenin wrote when he had comments on the various other leaders of the Bolshevik Party, and he said, Trotsky's too clever by half, and Stalin's they call him a bore, I don't think he actually said who was going to seize power, or who power should pass to after he died. I don't think he prepared a succession. I mean, Stalin managed to easily outmaneuver Trotsky for all sorts of reasons. Trotsky hadn't joined the Bolshevik Party in 1917. Trotsky was Jewish. Trotsky was interested in trying to spread the revolution to other countries, while Stalin and his people said, look, let's consolidate things and establish our rule here. So he was easily able to outmaneuver Trotsky.
So, what document or where is it published that Lenin realized what he had done and so forth?
Well, that's my interpretation of his last article. There's a little pamphlet published by in Moscow at the time. Incidentally, the People's Publishing House in Moscow now prints religious tracts, but in the time it used to produce Marxist pamphlets and pamphlets by. But there's one called Lenin's Last Articles. He doesn't explicitly say that. I mean, you should read it yourself and make your own judgment. But he says at one point, where did Marx ever say that you can't seize power first and then educate the workers into socialism?
Educate first.
Yeah. So that whereas classic Marxist position, which we've inherited, is that before you take power, there has to be a majority of people who are educated, if you like, but who understand and want socialism. Lenin was sort of, but he's obviously thinking about this because he says, we're doing it the other way around. Then he says, look, we've got people mentioned before. There's peasant majority and they they think like peasants. They've got the land, that's all they want, and will we be able to stay in power? And then you can see people like Stalin and other developing into a sort of privileged bureaucracy in this sort of thing.
Because Lenin, I remember somewhere reading in Lenin where he laid great stress on Marx's interpretation of what practiced in the Paris Commune.
Yeah.
That it has to be the working class themselves that has to take over, and therefore education of working class is the primary importance.
Well, I think
that was the lesson learned from the Commune.
Well, I mean, that's it. If you read what Lenin wrote before 1917, what he wrote after 1917, if you're just dealing with socialism and economics and so on, he's no different from other people who called themselves Marxists at the time. But where he was different was in the organisational form that he said. I mean, he said the Social Democratic Party should be organised on military hierarchical lines, whereas his opponents, the Mensheviks, said no, because we want an open democratic party. Now you can argue whether that would have been possible under Tsarist Russia. Probably couldn't organise an open democratic party, but when Lenin put these ideas forward, that must be composed of professional revolutionaries, top down by the Central Committee and so on, it caused an uproar. I mean, even Rosa Luxemburg and Trotsky and people like that would say, look, Lenin, you've gone off the rails here, what are you proposing? But it proved to be a useful organisational form in 1917 because, there was chaos after the collapse and the other groups were so weak. But the only group probably capable of seizing power and imposing itself on Russia was the Bolshevik Party because they had this military-style organisation, which the others didn't. But I mean, there are plenty of works by Lenin, if you just look at the date when they were published, before 1917. That's all after 1917, you had to sort of justify what he'd done. And it's different.
Well, I don't know who made the quote, but somebody made a quote. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
And the problem is when Democrats get power, they suddenly lose the liking of democracy.
Yeah. Actually, that quote was from Lord Acton, who was a Catholic, and whether he applied to the Pope, I don't know.
Lord Acton.
H.G. Acton, the historian.
Acton.
Cambridge.
Yes, in the absence of democracy in Russia in 1917, could the revolution really ever have been a democratic one? Could it have been socialist in the sense we use it, democratic, open, majoritarian movements on? Was it constrained by the political situation of the time?
But I don't think it could have been that in Russia alone. But I mean, since we were in existence at the time, in theory, if there'd been a world socialist revolution, Russia could have been a part of it.
And also ran.
Yes, I mean, a subordinate part of it. But I mean, that wasn't on the agenda to be realistic at the time. So, well, no, I mean, socialism was out of the question. But then, I mean, do we need to? Well, we can speculate on what socialists would have to do in Russia in those circumstances. And perhaps my Freudian slip wasn't a Freudian slip when I said Mensheviks instead of Marxists. I mean, if they could have been a democratic republic established in Russia that was stable and lasting, then that would have been the best outcome. Because you could have had the trade union movement developing, you could have had a party like ours developing, and other political parties. But even that was probably out of the question, speaking realistically. I mean,